I wanted readers to say, boy, those editors at the Times, they're so smart. What I did not want them to say was, gee, those people at the Times, they can afford to buy the best art.
On September 21st, 1970, the New York Times premiered a new section called the Op-Ed, or Opposite Editorial Page. The title implied both its physical location and editorial position. It was a page without editorial precedent, and its unique artwork by a repertory of politically savvy illustrators and cartoonists made it even more distinctive.
What we wanted for artwork on the page was not the traditional political cartoon.
Silverstein soon hired a brash, young, witty cartoonist illustrator turned art director, Jean-Claude Suarez, who began his career in the 60s underground press and designed various counterculture periodicals. His mandate at the Times, to establish the page's graphic personality.
I knew the history of political art very well, and I'd examined what was being used at the time in newspapers. They were mostly syndicated cartoons. They were they were meant to appeal to the largest number of people.
Suarez drew inspiration from 19th century newspaper methods, like the linear engraving style of Thomas Nast, the symbolic acuity of Daumier, and the surreal vocabulary of Gégé Granville and Gustave Doré.
It was time for a big change, for the illustrators to be influenced not by cartoons as much as by movements in art, like surrealism and especially Dada, which was my favorite. I wanted the art to be well drawn, and I wanted to create some kind of emotional reaction.
The op-ed style sidestepped typical editorial cartoon cliches for more expressive, often personal, introspective symbolism. The art was making a mark, thanks in large part to the Watergate scandal.
For about a year and a half from the time that the burglars were arrested until the resignation, we had food for stuff every day.
Brad Holland was one of the regulars on the page who Suarez knew from the underground press.
I had a theory that you ought to just treat the art and the text as two separate elements that went together. In fact, the very first article that I was given to illustrate for the op-ed page was a two-part article about welfare. And the first one, I had an idea of a bunch of faces that were in the sky and they were crying, and the tears were like rain falling into a big fire down below. Second part, I wanted to treat welfare as if it were an addiction. So I did this picture of a junkie who was feeding mouths in his arm. This was a comment on the welfare society.
Many of these artists did not wait for an assignment.
Spasmo finished drawing, and it was done on speculation. No one ever assigned it. He just did it. And he brought it in. He said, I don't know if you're going to like this or not. And it turned out to be, you know, the Watergate drawing.
Op-ed artists were not political cartoonists in the conventional sense, but they were political artists that shot barbs at their prey without fear or favor. And unlike conventional cartoons, the graphic commentaries on the page allowed the readers to make their own interpretations.
Things don't have to be instantly recognizable. You don't have to understand something the minute you look at it. Often you give somebody a metaphor for something and it just sits in their head for a few years until some circumstance in their life unlocks it. Some people get it and some people don't, and some people will get it and some people never will.
The Cold War provided a steady stream of illustrators fleeing the Soviet bloc. They were particularly skilled in the art of graphic subversion.
There was this whole influx of Eastern Europeans who came in the 80s. The first one was Andrzej Dłużyński. He came in '81, which was the beginning of Solidarity. And the Poles, particularly, and all the Eastern Europeans, were very good at disguising their messages in metaphors and allegories. Dłużyński, he was really good at portraying Soviet situations, but he couldn't do it under his real name. So we came up with the equivalent of John Smith, which is in Polish Jan Kowalski. He went to the Polish embassy and they wouldn't give him a visa. because they pulled out the drawer D, labeled D, and under Andrei Dzerzhinsky were all the Jan Kowalski drawings.
The op-ed page followed a strict Times format, but thanks to the computer, art directors were able to transform the design of the page itself into graphic commentary.
Why to not start to play with type as a, just pattern? This is one of those cases when design is winning over illustration, because that was 2 articles about Anti-Defamation League. One was pro, one was against. And now to illustrate that is almost impossible. I figured out probably best solution is to create negative Star of David and positive Star of David.
Editors needed to find a way to distinguish between art that illustrated an editorial and art that stood on its own.
The op arts were also an attempt to kind of not be so dependent on the news articles. The first op art that we did was with Tibor Kalman on smoking, and he had this idea that if the packaging for cigarettes was incredibly bland, if it was just a plain gray, for example, with Helvetica, that it would be so incredibly uncool that no one would actually want to smoke. That was his idea, which I differed with. I thought that would have a new kind of coolness almost, but it was a point of view, and it was a visual point of view, and so that was the first op art.
Every generation of image makers changes, and the audience changes and becomes, their appetite changes.
A more recent development are op charts, information graphics that shed light on issues through the marriage of graphic design and data visualization.
A researcher at Columbia had gathered together from all different sources, and it was just an Excel spreadsheet that had a list by date of the number of people killed and wounded in Iraq in the first 14 days of January in 2005.
That was the only way that you could really show impact, was just the sheer number of people, where it was a 1-to-1 ratio.
Basically, we looked at it quickly, and given the time constraints, trying to figure out a way to best represent these numbers in a way that was more viscerally impactful than just a spreadsheet.
The internet age has radically altered the nature of op art. Just about anything is reproducible on either of the op-ed's platforms, print and digital. Myra Kalman's popular online series, And the Pursuit of Happiness, has contributed to the redefinition of op-ed.
I was able to paint and to write by hand or to typewrite using very primitive means of communication. The technology doesn't matter, it's really what you're thinking, and any way that you can express it is the right way.
For 40 years, the op-ed page has continued to produce a stream of distinct artworks representing various styles and differing approaches. What hasn't changed is the conceptual acuity of the work and the invitation to the reader to fill in the blanks.
Even people who doesn't know about visuals, they stop for a second longer.
The art, hits directly, subliminally, viscerally.
So you see something that's familiar from a completely different angle or perspective or point of view.
I think for political art, you need to get an emotional reaction. Anger or bewilderment or something. That's the beginning.